children here, and so, but it's called all age, right? So that includes all of us then. And I'm looking for at least one volunteer. To do what?
That's what I would ask.
So let me start. I need a volunteer. Who can help to fill this bowl with stones? And the trick is they should all fit in. So I went into my garden and into my house and got lots of stones, small and little ones. And do I have a volunteer? Okay, Jill. Oh, Marie. And so afterwards, so we'll know whether you have been successful if this doesn't rattle. You know, so it needs to fit, right? Yeah, we can do it together actually. Why not? Yeah, come and do it together.
Oh my goodness! Oh no!
Yeah, you can even put them out. That's why
That side of the table, because we can't see the cheating.
I'm not nothing to look at.
So try and put them in.
I don't think they're all going to go in. Have you tried putting all these things in? I don't know. That's good.
It's tricky.
Wanna come and have a go?
Regine is bound to have done it. She's very clever. I know, but it's not got to rattle.
It's a whole bunch of stuff.
Grow women.
We better get something really good if we manage it.
I didn't bring chocolates.
The lid's not going to go in.
Stop. It's just not got to rattle.
Put the lid on and try.
It's just not got to rattle.
Yeah! Now, you were very, very clever in the way you did it. Can you tell me, how did you manage to fit them all in? It looked like they were not going to fit. How did you manage? What was the important bit?
I think put the big one in first.
Putting the big one in first. Thank you very much.
Mission accomplished.
Okay, thank you. So on that note, let me read some verses from the Bible and see if you can make the connection. Now I need to. I'm going to do this. Can you set it the right side? So I just read you 4 verses when Jesus comes to the house of Martha and Mary. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. We'll talk more in a minute, but first, more songs, please. Okay. Thank you, Anna and team. This is where we want to live. This is how we want to live, right? Praising God, being full of joy. But, right? But life isn't really like that, right? Well, so let's be real, right? We read the story of Mary and Martha. So let's do a little compare and contrast, right? As people do. Most likely, people surmise that it starts talking about that Jesus came to Martha's house. Well, so that makes people think that she must have been the head of the household. And then she had her brother Lazarus and Mary living with her. And so probably she was the oldest. She probably was also quite wealthy and well off, because if she could have Jesus and all his 12 followers over, maybe even stay overnight, well, that house must have been a little bigger, and she must have had the means to do that, right? So she was a hospitable lady. And actually, Martha, I like Martha. She is pragmatic. She is practical. She's the woman who sees the work, right? And she opens her house to Jesus. She's a really true servant. Aren't we all meant to be true servants? And she is the good example of that. And then the scripture says she was distracted. Yeah, well, she had that little to-do list in her mind, right? Need to get cooking done. Maybe the beds are not quite ready. I didn't know they were coming. I'm welcoming them, but there's a lot of work to do, you know, and anybody who is practical would have that little to-do list going off in their heads, right? So she may be forgiven for being distracted, right? Mary. Well, she's a completely different character. She, wherever you are, she will be all ears and eyes. She will listen to you. I like people like Mary. Somebody where I have their full attention. But actually, Mary was a little bit out of, she didn't do quite what was normal. She was sitting at Jesus's feet. Well, normally that was what the men at that time would do. The women, they would be in the kitchen. They would do the hospitable thing. They would do the cooking. So Mary, being so bold or free, she actually, it says, took the seat of a chief disciple. I didn't know that until I was looking deeper into this. But so that was actually, so she must have felt very at ease with Jesus to do that. Must not have been the first time she listened to Jesus, right? And when Jesus comes to my house, everything else can wait, okay? The food will get done. We will eat, okay? But first, let me listen to Jesus. I'm not sure. Have you ever been in a position where you just really wanted to have a good talk, not like to tell them off, but really you wanted to have a proper conversation, and it wasn't maybe an easy conversation you wanted to have. And the person would just busy themselves. Maybe also because they were insecure of like, what's coming? You know, so somebody says, want to talk to you, and no, I need to get ready. It's very recently, something like that happened in our house. I've also been the person where I didn't want to stop what I was doing because I was scared of what was coming, okay? We talked about do the big stones in first, right? So that talks about priority. We're not talking, when we're comparing Mary and Martha, we are not comparing this is not about a character that is holier and a character that is less holy, right? Martha remains Martha. Martha is very forward, okay? She is the proactive one. Even later on, when we see the story of Jesus raising Lazarus, she is the one. Both of the sisters go and call Jesus and say, our brother is sick. And Martha is the one who later says, when Jesus says, get him out of the tomb, she said, but smells, you know. And later on, we see again in John 12, it talks about Martha being the one who is serving Jesus, and Mary is the one who pours perfume over Jesus, you know. So again, we see that difference in character. And it says in John 11 that Jesus loves them both, you know, and the brother. So he loves them equally, and their character does not change, okay? So what it is about priorities. Jesus came to Martha, Mary's, and Lazarus's home. He was not mentioned there, but we should think he would be among those listening to Jesus. And if somebody comes to visit you, the most important thing is to talk with them, right? The most important thing is not the meal, right? And everything that goes around it. On another day, God gave me another song. He sort of reprimanded me. I want to sing it to you. You don't, again, no words for you, just for you to listen and think of it as God speaking to Regina, maybe God speaking to you as well. I can type with it. Is my on? I think one. I can tap. So I know the person who is busy, right? And I will type in the song God's Love Call. If you learn my name, if you don't see my face, if you don't sit in my presence, how should I feel? You say that I'm precious to you, more than anything in life. But am I really your priority? Your greatest love? May I say yes, things don't go. So Martha says, Jesus, don't you care? Don't you care my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? The first thing, there are three things that get us off track, that get us off that praising that we have just done. All starting with D, distraction, discouragement, and doubt. Distraction, discouragement, and doubt. Okay. I need help here. So distraction, we can understand it, but we see what it does. If we don't put the big stones in first, if we let the little stones, oh yeah, there was the thing that I should demonstrate as well. That is what happens if we don't put the big stones in first. Let me just demonstrate it for you very quickly. So let me put in all these little stones here. So now I'm getting to the bigger one. Okay, it's very clear that no lid. Oh, okay. Where is this? I think it's very clear that the lid does not fit on this one, right? So if we leave the most important thing, what is most important for us to last, it will not fit. Our life is already too full, right? So distraction, I don't want any of this. This is technology. I wanted to read you from a book that I found in preparation for this. It's called Having a Merry Heart in a Martha World. And so this is written by a lady, I think she's a pastor's wife and a very busy lady. And she was getting a bit discouraged and started to doubt God. You know, so a very godly woman, but some things hadn't gone the way that she had thought God would answer her prayer. And let me just read it out. I can't put it any better than she did. So entitled, Lord, Don't You Care? It began one spring as the crocuses pushed their way through hard-crusted soil and the tight buds of trees slowly unfurled towards the sun. All around me, the world was waking, but the warmth of the changing season never reached my soul. While I still loved God, he seemed distant and preoccupied with someone other than me. It was, I suppose, my first true spiritual crisis. Having been raised in a Christian home, I eagerly accepted Jesus at the age of 4. I loved God with a childlike totality, and I knew he loved me though sometimes I wondered why. Yet slowly, over the years, mostly without my knowledge, little strands of uncertainty had been spun in my soul, and gradually they had knit themselves together into a dark veil. That spring, after 15 years of full-time ministry, I began struggling with doubt, especially in the area of prayer. God didn't seem to be answering my prayers as he should. Ask what you will and it shall be given to you, he had promised, but I felt as if someone at the pearly gates was making my prayer mail return to sender. My friend wasn't healed of terminal cancer, and my mother continued to struggle after open heart surgery. Even small requests were left unanswered. My van, for instance, still made a frustrating squeal, impervious to the efforts of the mechanics and their lube jobs, and the heater wouldn't work right. Other little things kept going wrong. Nothing major, just enough to keep me worried and, yes, distracted. The van proved to be the final showdown, my spiritual Alamo. Winter returned to Montana and I drove down to see my mother and was battling depression. A year had passed since her surgery, and despite a strict vegetarian diet, her cholesterol levels had soared. The medication caused terrible mood swings and chest pains. She was ready to give up. I'd rather go be with the Lord, she said. If the quality of my life is diminished, there's no sense in living. We cried and prayed together. I wanted to be understanding and supportive, but I felt so frustrated by my mother who was ready to end it all because she felt winded after pulling weeds and cleaning house. Mom, it isn't what you do that makes you who you are, I told her through my tears. It's never been that. I love you for you. I need you. Please don't give up. She looked so small and fragile as she leaned in my van to hug me the next evening. I'd come to encourage, to build up, to somehow fix the emotional short circuit that left my normally positive mother negative and hopeless. But the short visit had ended bittersweet with an impasse. Did you get the window up, she asked. A day before, she had lowered my van's power window, and there it had stayed, refused all our creative attempts to close it. No, but I'll be okay, I gave her one last hug, glancing at the sky. Snow had begun to fall, and the clouds looked stormy dark. The gas station mechanic offered no solutions, so I closed the door on the top of a towel and drove out of town angry. Angry at the window that still wouldn't budge, angry at my mother who seemed to be giving up, but most of all angry at God who didn't seem to be paying any attention at all. Okay, God, I prayed. You said I have not because I ask not. So here it goes. Please, Lord, please make the window go up. I've tried everything. You are the only one who can help. I worked up a reasonable amount of faith and pressed the button on the armrest. Nothing. Wind whipped through the window, tearing the towel from its place as I joined the traffic on the interstate or on the motorway. Icy snow swirled around the flapping towels and into the cab. Lord, you know my heater doesn't work and it's 150 miles home. Tears spilled over as I groped, trying to zip my coat with one hand. You say you'll provide all our needs according to your riches in glory. I just need a little miracle. Please. I paused a moment, as if giving my petition time to make it to heaven. My eyes closed for a split second as I pressed the little black lever. Nothing. Frustrated, I pulled over to the shoulder of the road and slammed on the brake. Fine. I got out of the car and slammed the door. The wind sliced across the valley floor, burying the highway in a flurry of snow. I removed the towel and pulled a flimsy spread from the back seat. If you won't take care of me, I will. Hostility burned high in my throat, choking me as I spit out the words with an anger that had built over the long, frigid summer and fall. How can I know you are real if you won't answer one little prayer? I'm desperate, but you are silent. I'm angry, but you don't seem to care. Earlier that month, I'd driven 15 miles with the window down in sub-zero weather. I'd taken hours to feel warm again. I climbed back into the van, wrapping the bedspread around my shoulders, preparing for a miserable trip. I finally shut off the faulty heater as the lukewarm air only aggravated the cold. We fell into an uneasy silence. My traitorous friend didn't seem interested in talking, so I spent the rest of the blizzard alone, struggling beneath the shroud of angry darkness. I turned on the Christian radio station and listened as people talked about God's love. But for the first time in my life, I doubted its reality. Did they ever question? Did doubt about the Father's sovereignty ever shake their faith? It was new to me, this cold, hard cynicism. The radio's clock glowed 10:59 p.m. when I finally arrived home. I'd driven slowly most of the trip, staring through the blinding snow for any sign of the center line. But somewhere along those fearful, frigid miles, I'd lost the anger. The last remnant of rage melted when I realized, 25 miles from home, that I was warm, truly warm. Though my nose felt chafed by the wind and my cheeks tingled to the touch, the rest of my body was extraordinarily comfortable, miraculously so. The Father had heard. The Father had answered, not in the way I'd asked, and certainly not in the way I'd planned. He hadn't rolled up the window, but he had wrapped me in his arms. I began to cry again. This time, the tears weren't those of a demanding child, but those of a chastened daughter. Trust me, my child, I have your ultimate good in mind. So much about distraction, discouragement, and doubt. I thought I couldn't put it in any better words at all. I also thought of the story of Lazarus, right? That's the same Mary and Martha, the same story. It's actually reported in John 11, and I we'll look at a few of those scriptures from there. So both sisters, Mary and Martha, sent for Jesus. They sent word to the Lord in John 11 and verse 3. It says, Lord, the one you love is sick. And then what does Jesus do? When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. And when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Jesus, he had enough to do. He had a pretty full life. There were lots of people to heal, lots of people to preach to, lots of people to teach. And Jesus, we see as someone who is never in a hurry. He never said, okay, change of plans, something important has come up, you know. Jesus, he heard that the one he loved, someone he was really close to, and yeah, he loved being with those 3 siblings, was really sick. And I'm sure they've told him it's serious, you know, it's not just a cold. And he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then the interesting thing is we see how teachable Martha is. So then when Jesus finally comes, yeah, so let me drop down to verse 17, John 11, 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. So he was definitely a bit late this time, right? Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them at the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, now we are looking at Martha again, right? That proactive woman. When she heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. So we see again the difference of the character, right? And now we see Martha in her shining colors, really. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So it's a sign of real faith. She had faith that, you know, Jesus could have shifted this situation. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. We don't hear that from Mary. We hear that from Martha. You know, so that is a woman who has not taken offense at Jesus correcting her in any ways and helping her to get her priorities right. But she, you know, she comes out to greet him and she says, whatever you ask, God will do it. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And then she says, yeah, I know he'll rise in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus says, I'm the resurrection, and whoever believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. In the same event, we also see Mary. So Mary's reaction is slightly different. So Martha says, Jesus is asking for you. So Mary also goes out, only then, to meet him. And when Mary, it's verse 32, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. And said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Exactly, 100%, same word that Martha has said, but that is as much as she can get out. Then she can only break into tears. So we see Mary, the calm one, maybe not so full of faith, but actually more in despair. But when Jesus sees her, he is deeply moved in his spirit and troubled, and he also weeps. That's where we have this short verse, Jesus wept. And that's when he says, okay, now let's go to the grave, right? So, and then Jesus raises Lazarus. I don't think that this was, so what we learned from this, I think, is God was powerful. God is powerful. Death is not the end for him, right? From the beginning when he went, he knew Lazarus was dead and he knew he was going to raise him. So, to call the elephant in the room, this afternoon we have a memorial service. How many of us prayed that Zara wouldn't die? If we think back, I don't know, Jill, how many years is it? I was in church then, 10 years? With Clive? 14. 14 years ago, we as a church were in a similar situation. He had terminal cancer and many of us prayed, Lord, do a miracle. You are able. We trust you. We believe in you. And he passed. And Zara hasn't come back from the dead. We know she's alive, but so what do we do in a case of this? This is not a matter of we didn't have enough faith. I think Jesus called Lazarus, and don't think a single person there was expecting him to do that, or had, I think that was completely out of anybody's frame of thinking of what could happen, right? So it's not a matter of we haven't had enough faith. If only 10 more people had prayed or 15 more people had prayed and had more faith, she would still be with us. But it also is not, he just couldn't quite hack COVID. God was not powerless. He was not powerless. He is not powerless against cancer. But we know that all of us one day will die. That is the way things go. That is the normal thing. That people are dead. I was in Africa and there was this little boy and we prayed for him to not die and he passed. And people then prayed for him to come back. It's only very, very little. He wasn't even walking and he didn't. So what do we do in a case like that? I think that is the case where we need to submit to God and to say, as Jill always says, the Lord knows best. I think she found that peace. He knows best. It's not what we prayed for. We believe he's still powerful. He could have done it, but he chose not to do it. And God knows best. Well, that is difficult. And sometimes that is a struggle, and sometimes that is a journey, right? That is not something that we come to from one day to another. And I'm a great believer in being authentic in our walk with God. So when Jesus, you know, he says, if you're weary and burdened, come to me. And my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So I've entitled the third point. The first point was it's about priorities. The second point was worry doesn't have to dominate our lives. The third one is living under the easy yoke. So I've been, like even yesterday, we had Word for the World prayer meeting here, and so then Mike said, well, what do you want us to pray for you? And I said, how to do life. How to live under that easy yoke. And it's something that has been with me from the beginning of the year. I thought I really authentically want to live. I want to take up that easy yoke, but what does that mean? So I'll just share a little bit of how I've been trying to live with that. A regular time with God, a time where I meditate on the word. For me, that is normally early morning. More recently, I also created a physical space. I know not everybody has that ability, but we have the tiniest of box rooms that you can imagine. And after one service here this year, I felt that I should take possession of that room and turn it into a prayer room. And that, what I did, that is the room now I go into to have my devotions. That is also the room I go into between Zoom meetings, just to have a breather. And what does that room look like? I didn't bring you a picture of the room, but I brought you some pictures that are in that room, and I'll talk about them. Is that visible? Maybe should I show them on Zoom once, or can you show? Yeah, let me just show them on Zoom once. Okay, so this one is called Fruitful. I have a very arty daughter, and she made this for me. I said to her, God has given me some adjectives, that's again years back, and can you turn them into pictures? So this one is called Fruitful. This one is called Carefree. No, this one is called, sorry. This one is called Carefree. And this one is called Joyful. Okay, so I just put that. And so those are, when I'm sitting in that room, those are the pictures that I'm looking at, right? And there are some more that I didn't bring, like comforted, precious. And I believe these are all things that God says over us. He wants us to be fruitful. That is what he has in mind for us. He wants us to live a carefree life because our cares are left at his feet. And when we go with joy, like we have just sung and expressed it in our songs, right? So a physical space to spend time with God. Previously, I've done it walking the dog, you know, it's like just going into nature. I really think it can help us to connect with God if we find a physical space. I think that's what Jesus also did. You know, he just went out early in the morning, he would rise and go somewhere. He didn't have a fixed space. Singing is another key for me, to live under that easy yoke and to discuss, to meditate on God's scripture and to discuss it with others. And to end the day in prayer. That's something that I've long struggled with. But since I've had that space, I have been much more successful in also ending my day with God. And the thing that, the thread that goes through it for me, that is submitting my day, submitting my plans, submitting whatever happens to God over and again. And I believe that is what will help us to be fruitful. That is how fruitfulness comes. It says in Psalm 1, blessed is the one whose delight is in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, who yields its fruit in season, and I have to look, whose leaf does not wither, whatever they do prosper. Joshua 1 verse 8 says, I was learning them all, anyway, let me read it out. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. And in John 15, we know that Jesus says that without him, we can do nothing. But if we stay with that branch, if we abide with him, we'll be fruitful. He has set us to be fruitful. So I would invite you to sing with me again. This time, let's change the pronoun. Let's say, your yoke is easy and your burden is light.
Lord, save us from our busyness. Save us from spending time, energy, money, thoughts on things that do not really matter. Lord, we want to store up treasures in heaven where moth and vermin do not destroy. where thieves cannot come and steal. You are our greatest treasure, and when you say yes, we want to say yes. And when you say no, we want to say no. Teach us to sit at your feet, just to spend time in your presence. Say yes to the way that you are doing life, and submit to you. Amen.